My name is Jay Rasmussen. I know almost everybody here, but not quite everybody. I serve as Faculty Development Coordinator, and one of the events that I like to work with is something called a Teaching and Learning Roundtable. We have 6 of them in the year. This is the second one. The first one we had focused on the design of fully online courses and hybrid courses. This obviously is the second one right now, and today's session is going to focus on facilitating online and hybrid courses. And we have 4 other ones planned for the year. On November 25th, we'll start a 2-part series on writing. April Schmidt will work with the one on November 25th. It's called Ignoring Comma Splices. Is there a place for bad grammar in good learning? Okay. And then a follow-up one to that one will be February 10th, and April will be working with that again. They didn't teach it. I don't have time. A discussion on teaching writing in Bethel's curriculum. And then on March 31st and April 28th, we're going to go into a 2-part series. Are you huffing and puffing again, kid? Okay. He was sick last time, too, on top of that. But, thanks for getting here. Sure. On March 31st, April 28th, we'll focus on a 2-part series on research. And the first one will involve a panel presentation. Folks talking about how they try to balance out being a teacher here and conduct research at the same time. And the final one on April 28th then will be, again, a panel presentation of some of Bethel's best researchers, I think, most prolific researchers, just talking about some of the tricks of the trade. How do they get some of the research done? So hopefully you can attend some of those. A teaching and learning roundtable is meant to be a discussion, and here's my official title for it, but I call it a conversation in which some smart person or persons shares their content, expertise, experience, passion with equally smart persons, that would be you all here, who dig deeper into the content through focused discussion. And we've got a great group of panelists here. How many were here for the first one? I'm kind of eyeballing. Okay, so we've got a lot of return visitors. We've got a few new ones. First time we had them introduce themselves. I'm going to mix it up this time. I'm actually going to have them introduce each other a little bit. So, Bob, I'm going to put you with Joyce. So why don't you just say a few kind words, preferably about Joyce here. And Joyce, I'll have you introduce Bob.
All right. Well, I'll start then. Well, Joyce, I think, is one of the innovators at Bethel University in the online environment. She's been teaching several business courses and started out doing it, I'd say, as not a neophyte, because she'd done it before, but trying it totally online in the Bethel environment. And has really done some very innovative things, kind of meeting with students once a week and one-on-one, or once a semester one-on-one, or twice a semester. Some things to bring some of the personalization and other things. So some very unique types of things to do in the online environment, other than just putting the course online. So I'd say she's one of our leaders.
Joyce, comments about Bob? I know you worked with him. So.
Yes. Well, Bob has saved my life many times. So when putting things online, with asking about a new technology, I think the one thing that you learn when you're doing this is it continues to change, and Bob has his hands on it all. So whether we were going from Blackboard to Moodle, or whether I was like, well, how do we do an embedded video, and what's that all about? So Bob is just an incredible resource to every single faculty member here, and I wouldn't be having my classes online without his expertise.
I'm going to have you two introduce each other. I know you know each other. So, Matt, if you'd like to introduce Lisa Sumser, that'd be great.
Lisa Sumser teaches a lot of different education courses. How many different programs do you teach in the Bethel?
3.
Oh, okay. Just only 3. Right. And I think we met working on Jay's Master of Ed program maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And Lisa ended up being one of the 3 peer reviewers that we had for all the new courses that were coming out of the program. And that's how I got to know her best, and really enjoyed just kind of her ability to think through complex problems in a real productive way. She seemed to have a real knack at the time for wrapping her arms around a lot of the things that Jay was trying to do in his master's program. She's an expert in differentiation, so we'll deal with her. And what should I say about you?
That's good.
That's good what she does.
This is Matt, and what I think is amazing is that my interaction with Matt started, as he said, with working with Jay in his online program and designing it. It was going to be fully online, and Matt's leadership was critical to the success of that program. training us about what online should look like, making us aware of some of the key questions that we didn't even know to ask, pushing us to answer really significant questions about structure, and making things easy for students. It was just impressive. And he mentions that peer review element. It was probably one of the most satisfying professional activities I've had of recent years, is listening to Matt and listening to Jay, and how we were able to look at courses and really just move things forward in an online environment. So it was impressive. So I only know you in that environment, really. That's terrible.
It's fine.
There's more. There's more to Matt that I'm not aware of.
Okay. Sam, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. If you could introduce this character up here, that would be appreciated.
All right. This is Chris Geertz, he's the chair of the history department at Bethel, and also the co-coordinator of CWC. So teaches students in lots of different formats at lots of different points in their career. So he teaches CWC working with students who are sort of in their first semester at Bethel. He's traditionally taught our senior seminar in our history department, so students sort of all the way through. His online experience dates back to 2006, working with kind of supplementary course material, podcasts, and incorporating some of that into his Modern Europe course as a hybrid course. And then he taught CWC online this summer with me, sort of as a reluctant online teacher, and he's somebody who I think generates a lot of outside-of-the-box ideas because he's never been really in the box of online education very much. So I think that makes him a creative voice. He's somebody who I frequently will just go talk to without an agenda because we usually find one as we talk.
Well, we really have one question for today, so I think we're going to launch into that question. And our basic format is we'll have one of our panelists respond to the question, and then if you'd like to follow up with any questions or any comments yourself. Last time it felt like our audience was fairly quiet. I'd like to change that a bit if we could here. So as you're kind of hearing the question, listening to their responses, if you'd like to add some things to it, that would be great, to that larger body of knowledge that we have. I know a lot of you personally, I know a lot of you got some experience with online things. You have something to say too. These aren't the only folks that know anything. So feel free to jump in with comments too, not just questions. So the basic question that we're working with this time is what do you personally, what do each of them personally feel are really best practices when it comes to facilitating an fully online course or with hybrid instruction? And we'll kind of go with a volunteer here. Somebody would like to maybe start us off and just lay out some of your thoughts. Anybody want to go? Otherwise, I will pick on you, just like you would if you were running these things. So anybody like to lead off?
Well, I ended last time, so I guess I can start. It's not in reverse order. And as I was thinking about the question, Jay, I was really thinking that there's three general areas that I think are critical when I'm thinking about how I interact with my students in the online environment. And that's the first thing I do is I think about how I'm going to interact with my students. Because it's really no different than face-to-face. Because you've got to figure out how can I get my student, how can I get myself to my students, how can I get the content to my students, how can I get the students involved. So I ended up with three P's. I don't know if that's a good theological way, but it's got three in it. And it didn't start out that way. It started out with just three concepts, and then I started thinking, okay, how can I put them together into something to make it fit? So I coerced some words. And the first one that came to me was really the concept of passion. Passion of the instructor and somehow getting that passion across to the students. And that's not just passion for the content, which we really all have a great, we're good at that. We're really passionate about our fields and our content. That's what we do very well, but passionate about the environment as well. If you don't take a real love of the online medium and environment, that comes across to your students real quickly. So if there's kind of this sour tone of, I'm doing this online, but I really don't like it, and the students can hear our tones in classes. that becomes important. So I think that's kind of one of the critical ones for me, is that passion, that excitement, not just for the content, but the passion for the medium. So if you can do that, you've already sold something to your students. The second is one that I know there's also some controversy about as well. But I hear a lot about talk about it anymore, and that's personalization of the learning environment. How do you bring yourself to the students? How do you make them know you not as a zombie or a automaton sitting in the background kind of grading their stuff and putting stuff up, but make yourself a person? How do you bring the person to them? I know some people say, well, you just keep talking as you're talking and making mistakes in English. At least the last time I did that. And that's one way to do it. So there's all kinds of ways to show them you're a real person, that you're really involved with them. You're taking ownership of their learning, but also that their personalities come across as well. You give them an environment where they can actually express themselves and their personality, their personhood, their passions as well. And then the last one is perhaps, and they're not all distinct. So I have to take my course and make it mine. And that's kind of where I worry a little bit about online learning, where we want to make it a course in a box. Can we take a course and just say anybody can teach it? Well, then that probably they can do it, but how they then take that course and make it their own course becomes that personalization piece. How do they involve the students in that? Last one's the participation. This is critical. And I don't just mean participation of the students, I mean participation of the instructor. How you get involved in for example, the discussion forums. Do you actually do your own discussion forums? Do you answer the questions you're asking the students? Or do you dominate the discussion at the other end of it and make it so they feel uncomfortable participating? So that participation, the involvement of you, and then also the involvement of the students. How do you encourage involvement? How do you get them involved? Again, they're all three interrelated. I think those are kind of the critical pieces. Then there's all the other stuff, how to grade, all that kind of stuff. But those are, I think, the three big ones for me in a generic way. I'll let everybody else deal with the details. Or how they differ.
Bob kind of touched on a bunch of things there at one shot, but let's follow up on anything you'd like to in terms of his comments. Or, again, if you'd like to interject something, I mean, that's great as well, too. Yeah, Bob, just...
Carol, go ahead.
The question I'm in the middle of designing my very first one to be taught in the spring. So that's where I am. And the question I'm running into right now with the choices and decisions that I'm trying to make is I'm realizing when I'm meeting with the students face-to-face and lecturing to them, I'm not just trying to convey material to them, I'm also trying to show them how I think about it. And that's the part I'm not sure I'll be able to do as well or do in the online environment. How do I do that? Do you have to just make the narrated PowerPoints and let them hear you talking about it, or what? Or are there other ways to do that?
I think anybody can pick up on that question here, too, not just Bob, but others. I think it's a great question.
How do you do it in your face-to-face class?
As I'm talking with the students or presenting something to them, like in a PowerPoint, the things that occur to me, I mean, it happens on the spur of the moment. The things that occur to me in that particular setting, I bring up, I guess. I don't know. They come up and I think, oh, here's an interesting thing I hadn't thought about before. And then I kind of ask them about that, or I kind of say, if I'm speculating about this, I'd say that, or this is a possibility, or this, and so that's how it happens if I'm just talking about it. It's like literally kind of this spur of the moment thing, but I realize what I'm doing is hoping that in doing that and, straying away from the notes a little bit, that they're seeing that this is the way you find out about this stuff. This is how you learn about it, or how I've learned about it and how I think about it. That's as far as I can go.
I have an opinion. Chomping at the bit to answer. I think that those things still have to happen for you to feel engaged in the content and in the course, and for your students to feel that you're passionate about, your narrated lectures or the other stuff that you put there for them. My opinion is that those little epiphanies, little moments that you're having that you want to share come either through announcements, maybe at the beginning of the course, or the beginning of a section of learning. I think about, there are some things that I do similar to what you've explained that are intentional. I'm going to share that with the students, how I came to this realization or how I think about this, and it will help guide the rest of their learning. And then other things I save until afterwards. The next week you say, well, in review, this is what I was thinking about, and so commented about that in the forum, or, you beef up what other people have said and add to it. So it's kind of a summative or a closure piece where you're revealing, what you've learned. It's also really fair to offer more information as the course is going along. Not that you're changing your assignments or changing the structure, but to say, oh my gosh, I came across this great, little tidbit, just as you would do in a face-to-face class. You'd offer a little video or say, did you read this article? And you just do it in an online format. So absolutely, those unplanned things, expect to include them.
I would say, and additionally, it kind of comes out for me in the discussion forums where many times I just let the students just have their discussion and I'm observing by reading through what's happening. But sometimes what I do is have what I call a discussion wrap-up right there in that forum. It's kind of like if we're in the classroom and students are raising their hands and asking different questions, you kind of hear what's going on, and that's when it hits us that, I want to share something right now. And so if you do it right there at the end of the discussion and call it the discussion wrap-up, and they're kind of trained to watch for that discussion wrap-up, that's where I share a lot of those insights that come along that I've been able to read through on that particular topic.
Yeah, another thing I've done, Carol, is I'll stop in the middle of my narrated PowerPoint and said, and this is the point where I oftentimes have an internal dialogue. And I'll have that internal dialogue that you would in class, kind of showing them how you think. And say, okay, this is one way I see this. Okay, this is the other way. And here's another way that somebody else might see it. So you kind of build it into, as opposed to just giving the content, some of the controversies or the thinking or the way of coming to that consensus is happening in the scientific field.
There is a challenge to it, though, right? Because you're having to, in ways that you wouldn't normally have to in a face-to-face classroom, you're having to anticipate, what would I be thinking about were I in the middle of a conversation about this? And I think everyone that's had to design courses for like an asynchronous environment where you're building a lot of this ahead of time, especially if it's a course you haven't taught a million times, it can be challenging. So one of the things that I do, especially if I'm already teaching the course face-to-face, and I'm planning on teaching it at a distance, I'll actually sit down and do some journaling after class sessions that I've taught, where I'm actually taking notes on what did I say that I didn't expect I would say tonight that seemed to work, or what kinds of ideas did the students come up with tonight that I wouldn't have thought of. And I keep those notes for some of the classes I teach, and those come in really handy when I'm building stuff out later because they get me back in the moment for that class. Sometimes you don't get to do that. I mean, sometimes you have to build a distance course where you haven't taught it face-to-face, and that's that kind of thing even more challenging.
Neil, I think you Joyce answered my question for the most part. I was going to ask, so, at what point and how do you dive in, Bob, with participation? It just feels to me like when I've had discussion boards going on, I kind of sit back and watch what's going on with the students, and I almost feel like if I get in there, then it might change the dynamics.
Or stop the dynamics.
Or stop, yeah, that was good. And so, how much do you get in there?
That's a good question. Somebody might be addressing that.
Well, I think for me, the way I do it is I usually give students 24 hours in which to respond to a discussion and engage in it. During that time, I strictly observe. And I tell them ahead of time, I'll be reading everything that's being posted. If I see them going down a bunny trail, like totally off, they're missing something, then I would say something to get back on track if they were totally off. But usually what I do is I wait until after the 24 hours of the discussion is done and then do that discussion wrap up. So that, because when I have gone in, when they're having a good discussion and I'm just go in to start discussing with, it usually stops the discussion. Yeah, so I usually wait that 24 hours and then go in and post something.
I
declare the truth for them.
I have to admit,
Exactly.
I usually do the assignment along with them, so I just pretend I'm a student. Unfortunately, my name's there. What's interesting is that they will always converse with others in the class about their posts, but never about the instructor's post.
There's a lot of, I know there's a lot of different perspectives on how you should involve and when you should involve yourself when forums are going on. Is there anybody here that gets involved a little bit more up front? And are there times, Joyce, you talked about when you might, but anybody else here that tends to be proactive in the discussion early on? Lisa, sometimes do you do that, or?
I'm really hands-off with
Okay.
discussion boards,
Okay.
actually.
Yeah. Okay.
And my reason being is I don't use them as assessment tools, really. They really are just discussions. They're conversations like they'd have in class. So I try to stay out of them as much as possible so that they will keep working through and go deeper with content. And I don't want them to feel judged. Because I would much prefer that they're having, I want them to reveal where they're struggling. I want them to reveal what they don't understand. And if sharing that in a discussion means that they get fewer points, then I'm going to get Wikipedia answers, and that isn't what I want. So that's my perspective on it.
So what percentage of your discussion forums do you assess any of them, or none of them, or half of them, or?
I do assess, and it's different for different courses depending on what the purpose is. But a lot of times my discussion boards are more about just participating. It's about just showing up and
So
being
if
present.
you post and reply,
Right, and here are the parameters. Here's the rubric for what participation looks like.
and that was freeing the first time Matt told me that, thinking about, I spent so much time in the discussion forums assessing them, and he said, well, do you do that in class? So I think a lot of us have that question, how do we do discussion forums and do it in a way that doesn't take us 34 hours a week in our online courses?
My hunch is as we keep going here, we're going to come back to forums, because I remember a lot of what Matt has said in the past, but one of the things I always remember is he calls discussion forums kind of the king, of online instruction. And so I want us to come back to that, because it's a critical part of what happens in that online world. So, yeah, Tim.
This is a question maybe going a different direction. I was really happy about when you were talking about the 3 Ps, that passion was one of them. And especially passion for the medium and passion for the material. I'm just curious, from people who've taught online a lot, what does that feel like for you? Because to me, when I think about classroom teaching, especially in CWC where we've got 130 students, that's the whole ballgame. That's the most important thing we can do, because we have to capture those students and bring them in. But what does that look like for you in an online? Both passion for medium and passion for message.
I think people show passion in a lot of different ways.
That's what I'm asking for you.
Right.
You don't need to tell me broadly what it looks like, but what does it mean for you?
For me, my passion comes out probably even more when I'm building things than when I'm actually showing them to people. So that's gonna tend to manifest itself in the way I'll even give advice about it, and I'll own that. So I want to make sure that my course is built in such a way that it's as accessible as possible, and it's as non-confusing as possible, it's as direct as possible. It respects the students as much as possible. And the same thing can be true when I'm facilitating. It comes out in just trying to be very, very, very careful in how I go about caring for the students that I have in that class. So it comes out as...
I think one of the things that I find really intriguing about online is, you have diversity of students, And you also know that you've got one teaching style that you really like to work with. And so I take the challenge of how do I reach all those different types of people in the course and yet still keep a common core of the course. So it kind of becomes a passion in the design that you're talking about to not only make it accessible, but to make it visual, to make it verbal, to make it intuitive, to make it straightforward. So there's almost a challenge in the design itself that really brings out the creativity in the instructor in order to somehow bring out that creativity in the students.
Can I respond to this as a strategic problem for those of you who would not describe yourselves as reluctant online teachers? I don't know everyone here. How many people here are from the arts and humanities? What was your background?
English.
Okay. It's a real problem if you want online to be anything at Bethel that really is at the core of the institution. You are not capturing that division. You've got Sam and me here, and we're as far from being technophobic as possible. I think we're fairly experimental and innovative. We threw a lot of ourselves into this. And we're describing ourselves as reluctant online teachers. We'll try this again. They're probably not sold on it. So I think, Bob, I appreciate every single one of those 3 Ps. I think it's exactly right. I think that'd be true face-to-face, too. But a part of it is passion for the format itself. It seems like you have a problem that has not been solved yet. And I appreciate your answers. I appreciate care and diligence and diversity. I also think if I were a student, I might try to write passion on idea evaluations based on that. And I think for what we do, I'm not delivering content. That's the very least important thing of what I'm doing. And I'm not teaching skills, although that's part of it. I am conveying passion. I'm performing. And there's a finite moment that's fleeting, and it can't be captured, and it can't be rerun, and it can't be stretched out to suit the convenience of the student. And it's spontaneous, and it's serendipitous, and I don't know how to do that online, because that is, we're converting people, and we're forming them. I don't know how to do that online. So if there's a way, if you've had moments like that where you've, like, a student once said, wow, that professor's passion today online that touched me. I never thought about that before. That moved me. That made me rejoice. That's the kind of thing I think that those of us in our division need to hear, or else you're going to have a really hard time penetrating. I think it's easier to imagine what this looks like in a professional program. I think maybe in sciences and math it's easier. I wonder, can you do that in a literature class? Do you have people who've taught those classes who are up here championing online and said they had a great experience and they felt like they were passionate about the environment? I'm trying to do this not as a critique, but as a problem for those of you who really believe in this, because I don't really believe in this. And I don't want to be up here dominating with me saying, but I would just suggest that's something that will need to happen. It's going to be not just something people do because they have to, or because few people do. If it's really central to the institution, you're going to have to find those champions at least.
And yet I would say that your call and also your earlier presentation drove me to a new level of passion, seeing what the two of you did with the passion and the personalization and participation in your course with the video weekly chat between the two of you. I look at that and go, wow, that's how can I replicate that in my course, or figure a way to do something similar to that. So your challenge is good. I would say you got an answer to the challenge too.
Well,
or a piece of an answer to it.
Yeah, that's great. I also think you probably heard us say, all things being equal, we would never do that. There's a counterfeit of things we do.
Right.
We passed off because it was the best we could come up with. We'll try to improve it next year. If we were not asked to do it, we never would try. I think there are some real advantages. And the question I would throw out there is, what can you do online as a teacher that you can't do face-to-face? So I think that's something you need to articulate well. But I also am curious, what do you think you can do face-to-face that you can't do online? And at a certain point, for example, there is the degree to which you cannot be spontaneous online. I've heard from Jay a number of times that the chief benefit is it's all planned out for you. And instead you can invest yourself in giving feedback, which was great, but then I never would have sang 3 World War I songs just half an hour ago and have my students quoting lights on and off. That couldn't happen. And so I think there are trade-offs here, and I think that would be a nice thing for us to discuss is, if you do online, what are you losing? If you do face-to-face, what are you losing that you can't do online?
Chris, I think you've done a great job describing exactly what the difficulty is. I don't know that it's as much an institutional difficulty as it ends up being almost like an existential difficulty for everyone that walks into that kind of a world. And we all have expectations about what it means to be in the role that we're in as teachers. What I found is that as I ask that question, and I get to ask that question a lot of faculty that I work with, especially when I'm working with faculty that are having to dive into this and they're asking exactly the same questions. One of the first questions I'll say is, okay, what does it mean to you to be a teacher that's going to be absent here? And then we can have a conversation about what perhaps might be added to it, to your question. One of the things that definitely a distance setting provides for students, or an online setting provides for students, is the benefit of more time to consider than they would typically get in the middle of a performance that is a lecture in a college classroom. And in fact, that is probably the major advantage of that. That and the fact that they don't have to physically be there. So the opportunity to be able to involve people who are not financially or geographically capable of actually coming to that place and participating in it. And there are some advantages. Obviously, you get face-to-face spontaneity being the biggest one. And really what it's required me to do as an instructor is to be okay with that. Really do see those as trade-offs and realize it's not a case of problems and solutions. It's a case of a different set of trade-offs than the ones I was doing before. And that's why hybrid courses are really the best of all worlds, because you can achieve both that extended learning environment that you get when people are kind of in the moment for an entire week, that you can't get in just an hour and a half, but you also have those moments where people can get together and have a much more spontaneous experience at the same time. That's the best of all worlds.
I just want to offer a potential reflection, just as kind of an observer. One of the mantras of the postmodern age that I learned in graduate school was the formulation, neither, nor either, or, but both and. And it seems to me that is one of the things that postmodernity is kind of about, and that is that, and I think one of the things that we're discovering in higher education is that we don't necessarily have to choose between this or that, but we can talk about potentially having both. And an analogy, for some reason, occurred to me as I was listening to Chris and thinking about what the rest of you had said. And it comes from my own area of studies in the humanities, and that is the difference between a film, as performance keeps getting mentioned, the difference between a film and a theatrical performance. So, and I wouldn't want to choose between, well, you can either go to the Guthrie and watch their production of Hamlet, or you can put in a DVD and watch Ethan Hawke's Hamlet. I would say don't make me choose. I want to experience Hamlet both ways. If I go to the theater and watch Hamlet, I'm seeing something very different, very incarnational, that cannot possibly be replicated on film. And I wouldn't want my students to draw their conclusions about Hamlet based only on what they see on the film. At the same time, you can do things on film that you can't possibly do in the theater. And theater is usually poorer when it tries to imitate film. But I would rejoice in the opportunity to do both. And so I wonder if there's a kind of essentialism at work that we need to resist. As sympathetic as I am to what Chris is saying, I wonder if, I think there's a sense that there's the genuine and then there's the effort to imitate the genuine. Whereas I would more see it in terms of, we have two different media. And here's what you can do in this medium, and here's what you can do in that medium. And there's a lot of overlap, but then there's some things that are uniquely happen in this medium and things that uniquely happen in that medium, and let's have both of them. I don't know exactly how that plays out. It's just it's a thought experiment right now, but that's the kind of direction I'm thinking.
That's called hybrid instruction. That's what it is.
Yeah.
My response to your question about passion, I think hits on this a little bit. Because for me, some of my passion comes through when I finally realized that I wasn't converting my face-to-face classes to online, but that I was creating something completely different. Maybe we'd get to the same place. Learning targets were similar or even the same, but they are not equal courses. They're different, unique entities, and so there was excitement for me in discovering what that content, that experience looked like in a completely different environment. what has been difficult for me, as someone who craves interaction, I love what happens in the live classroom. I love those moments of epiphany, that even one student gets it and you go, oh my gosh, I'm on the planet for a reason, and you go home thinking it was worth it. That still happens online. I'm just not there for that moment. And it's painful sometimes to hear about it, to get a written reaction, to get a phone call, and say, oh my gosh, it all came clear, I got it. And I think I wasn't there for it. I just get to hear about it afterwards. But the reality is for the student, it happened, and it isn't about my being there for it. It's about it happening. So I'm still working that out because I prefer teaching face-to-face, given the choice, given more hours in the day, given my family constraints. If I could just teach face-to-face, I probably would. But online, I can provide things for students that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. So.
I would just echo what Matt said a little bit too about just the chance that students have to take time to respond. And this is nothing new probably to anybody sitting there, but in any kind of a face-to-face class, you routinely got students that are very quick to speak. You've got some that are pretty slow thinkers. And I really believe that the ones that maybe are the slower to think or the more reflective ones, I think they have a chance to really tap into the depth of what it is that they have to say. And I think in a face-to-face environment, those that are quick-witted or whatever, they get their thoughts out, and then I think oftentimes thoughts kind of stop, after that to some degree. Somebody might have some thoughts on the way home in the car afterwards or whatever, but they don't have a chance to really express it and really share it in a meaningful way. And the class I teach, it's a measurement and assessment class, and you think it's kind of cut and dry, but there's a lot of interesting things to think about, connected with the course. And honestly, the depth of thought that I've seen is far superior, to anything I've seen when I've done it face to face. But I feel that it's really the thing it's doing better is it's really giving everybody a chance to really think deeply and really express what those thoughts are, for a wider audience. And I feel really good about that. So I do think the online part is superior in that regard. I know, Chris, that's not exactly what you're saying, but I do think it's one thing that's clearly better in the online world. And I'm just going to say too, Chris, that I'm really happy you're here, and I knew how you think when I asked you to be on the panel, and I knew you would raise questions. I knew you'd be honest with what you're saying, and that's really what I want this discussion to be too. So I'd like us to keep kind of responding. We haven't fully answered, if there is an answer to everything, but let's keep working with that thought in mind, as some of the other panelists maybe share some thoughts here too. So maybe somebody wants to pick up on a little bit of what Bob was doing, or maybe go off on what Chris was saying a little bit too, or even Chris, if you want to follow.
Yeah, sure. I tried to do a good answer to Barrett's metaphors. I think it's a good one. The difference between theater and film. In a sense, we do this every time we use a book in class, right? I was doing French anarchism on Friday, and so my students read a book called The Dynamite Club, which is about a 20-year-old guy who throws a bomb in a cafe in 1894. All things being equal, I would have brought one of my Professor John Merriman, who wrote the book, to campus, and they could have talked to him about the book, but instead they got 220 pages to read about it. It also makes me think that when we say that hybrid is better, it means that face-to-face is better, because we're using distance technologies every time we teach face-to-face, right? It's just called the codex. And so I guess I don't understand.
That's hybrid instruction.
Yeah, exactly. But what it means is when we say hybrid instruction, we really mean what we call face-to-face. And there's something about that, and it's a trade-off, maybe, that suggests that maybe this is not just personal preference, but there is something irreplaceable that you cannot actually migrate to online. And you're just doing it instead of reading a book, it's you are watching something before you come to class, here's something to talk about. And maybe I'm just misunderstanding the way you structure time in a hybrid. You create some of that drawn out period. But I understand the essentials. I think that's a really good point there. These are not, I don't like false dichotomies generally, but I do want us to think about what is being lost when we make arguments. Like, I appreciate, Matt, that you point us to data-driven research on what happens when we teach. And I've looked at no significant difference several times. I appreciate that. I'm willing to buy that. That on the kind of things they're asking about, there is no significant difference. And in some respects, online probably does the job better, and it certainly expands who has access. And I think that's really important. At the same time, those kind of studies don't ask anything that really matters deeply to me. They do not ask, do you love God and do you love neighbor? They do not ask, what is the state of your soul and how is that being formed? And they can, and those aren't measurable. That's why the culture of assessment generally is a big problem for what we do. But I want to believe that can happen online because, good grief, Paul writes epistles to people hundreds of miles away that he never meets, and that transforms their lives. But it's because they're in embodied communities where they talk about it together. And maybe there's a way to bridge that.
You know what, actually, that's a really great point. There's a, and I don't perceive you as having this misconception. I'm just going to say there is a misconception out there that if you're doing face-to-face learning, that we're all face-to-face and we're all doing it together. If I'm doing online learning, then I'm sitting in front of a computer monitor, and that's what I'm doing. And that's why and Jay, you know this is why I hate the term online learning. I just hate it. Because that's just a medium. Face-to-face is just a medium. I'd rather talk about distance learning or not distance learning. And so really what we're trying to do when we do online learning is we're trying to provide an educational experience to students who will not physically show up to the classroom. That's really what we're doing. And if we did it over the telephone, we wouldn't refer to it as telecommunications learning. We used to talk about having correspondence classes because we used the mail, but really that tends to trivialize it as well. So, at a distance, what is really going on? Well, the student is able to stay situated in their own place where they know people, where they have access to their own community that they're a part of. And one of the things that I see really good online instructors doing, distance instructors doing, I'm going to use the term now, part of all this, is pulling the students into their own communities and then enabling those students to bring their communities back to the class in some real ways. So that instead of us thinking in terms of, well, I've got 25 students in my class and I've got to get them all conversing together about all these things, I can think about it that way, or that feels manufactured sometimes. But what I can do is say, you need to get into your community and ask these questions of your community somehow. And then what we want you to simply report back to us what you learned about that. So really what we can do then is we can multiply the influence of all these other communities that are coming into our discussions. Obviously the medium is different for doing that. So there are some pieces that will feel different. But in that sense, we don't really... There are some people that would actually say that some kinds of face-to-face learning is actually more of a ripping experience than online learning because you have to tear students out of the place where they're familiar, put them into an artificial environment, also known as college, sequester them there for 4 years, then send them back out into the real world. And wouldn't it be better if we could leave them there and still affect them? That question hasn't been answered. And I think there are advantages to doing both. Once again, there are some advantages to having students be physically situated and kind of sequestered away from the world in certain ways. And there are advantages to leaving in the context as well. But it's never, like you said, it's never quite that cut and dry.
I don't know if it's about being sequestered. I think it's great that they're ripped away. I don't want them to be comfortable. I want them to be in an alien environment. I want them to be frightened. The most important thing Parker Palmer ever wrote is that this is about fear, and it's about what we do to alleviate that fear. And that is really hard. To me, I don't know, maybe it's just the failure of my imagination. I don't know how to do that in a disembodied way. And what I worry about distance or online is that I hear that. This will be easier for students. This will be simpler. They'll be in a comfortable environment. And to an extent, I get that. I think that I can see that. I think maybe this is a developmental thing. Like this works better with professional graduate seminary programs than with 18-year-olds. I really want the 18-year-olds to be comfortable. I think they're comfortable enough because so many of them come from Moundsview High School and they barely come into transition. I want them in a place that's disconcerting and disorienting because I want them to be a little bit ungrounded and rootless. Because otherwise it's going to be really hard to accomplish the kind of transformative change we talk about. I don't want them to be terrified. I don't want them to think that there's nothing beneath them or in their foundations. We're catching them if they fall. I'm using just metaphors. The problem with distance to me is it feeds a kind of idea that we have consumers, not students, because they get to define the parameters in which they interact with education. They get to go and they shop for something that's going to be easiest, most convenient for them, fit their schedule. They're going to find when they get to do it, how much of themselves are going to give into it, and that's true face-to-face as well to some extent, except that I can see that happening, and I can confront it. And so again, I just don't know how can you disrupt people enough at a distance due to the kinds of things we say we do with liberal arts education.
I think one of the things that I've noticed in having sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and I know there's different developmental things, I don't teach freshmen, but from the face-to-face class, once again, just because everybody's sitting in the room doesn't mean that they are absorbing and being transformed at that point. And so we can't assume that just because it's face-to-face that's happening. Now, obviously, as professors, we can read, some nonverbal, that type of thing, absolutely. But what I find really interesting is I have that same student face-to-face, and then I have a student that's online, that same person, and how they can just blossom. I've seen it happen many times online because they're not comfortable. There's some people that, as we know, that are more extroverts. They feel more comfortable speaking out in class. By the time they're juniors and seniors, they might be the same group that have had classes when they're in a particular program. And so the same 4 or 5 people might be dominating a little bit. And so I think that what I've seen is it allows possibly a student who wants more of that reflective time, but also just maybe an environment where they can really share without having maybe somebody else right away shut them down. Let me speak, and they can speak online. Then somebody can respond to them. And so I guess what I'm saying is I've seen obviously the benefits of both, and sometimes it goes down to learning style, and so that's where I see the benefit of both types of learning. Not for everybody. There's some that I've seen them, they go into an online environment and it's a disaster for them. It's just not their learning style at all. So that is part of it, it's learning style.
Bob mentioned this, but I don't know if people really got it when he talked about Joyce. She will take part of her face-to-face time. It's an online class, but she'll take the time that she would have devoted face-to-face, and she will require students to come to her office. And you talk about fear and then supporting them. I've seen them come out of her office crying. And we've talked about it, that those were more transformative than hours and hours in class because they got down to something. It was the coursework. It started there. It's how are things going with the course. But then it became, well, there's this life event that happened. That doesn't typically happen in the classroom, but it did happen there. So there are ways to do some of that fear and support.
We should destroy the video on this, by the way.
I think these are fabulous questions. I think this is incredible. Seriously. Lisa, do you want to weigh in a little bit on kind of our discussion up to this point, too? And share some of your thoughts, but other thoughts as well.
One of the things that I think is probably most powerful about what I do while the course is going on is the feedback element. And it's, we automatically go to, well, it's just how we provide feedback in the forum or how we provide feedback in the grade book or, when we click on the rubric. And certainly those things are part of it. But for me, the feedback comes partly outside of the course through emails outside of the structure of Moodle. It comes through phone calls. I beg them to call me. I beg them to email me with questions. I explain to them that I'm a teacher who, will shrivel up and die unless they contact me. That I am waiting desperately for them to engage with me. That's my sole purpose in life, is to answer their questions and that they're not bothering me. Because I think online students in particular have this sense that we teach online because somehow we want there to be a wall. That we don't really like being with people. We prefer to be with our computers. So we don't want, there to be any engagement. And I think the more intentional you are with your course design, the more they assume, well, I shouldn't have questions because it's all laid out. She has a reason for everything, so it's me, I'm not understanding. So I beg them to connect with me. And the ones who don't, I call them, I email them, because I need that personal connection, and I think they need it, and they can fake somewhat their answers in writing sometimes. So I need that extra element of an oral defense kind of piece. Do they really know what's going on? Has there been something that they really understand? My forum questions, I'm sure someone will talk about this, and this is a course design piece, but the way you design your questions is really powerful. Making sure that they're able to be present in the questions. What connections do you have personally to this? What other materials have you found that relate to this concept? Those kinds of things where they're bringing something of their experience, of themselves, is critical to the discussion being vibrant. And then for all of us as a group to connect with each other and to connect further, more deeply with the content.
So that's a kind of multi-part question. Thinking about what Joyce said. So the first question is, how do we help students make the right choices? Because I think they're not making choices based on their learning style. I mean, their choices are all. When we ask students at the very beginning, sort of why are they taking this? What are they excited about? And every one of them was about convenience. Was their answer. That's not based. So that's part of the thing that I think. And then I have to preface this part by saying my experience at Bethel was very, very skewed. The two students in your class who are struggling, that's most of my experience at Bethel is working with those folks. So the sort of bottom 10%, whether they're provisionals or struggling students, and ask, how do those students do in these environments? Because that's where we in Ask are putting in an unbelievable amount of personal time, and we're not even their teachers. We're putting a lot into that, and then I know what it's like having those students in the classroom and the kind of investment we need to put into those. And again, those are students who my inclination would not be great rational choosers about this is my learning style and this is going to be helpful to me.
Right.
So how do they fare in your courses?
Well, first of all, let me start with the first question. And when we started doing Principles of Management class online, we had an online version of it and face-to-face, so we were concerned about that. So we started surveying the first 2 years that we did that, saying, why are you taking this? And absolutely, the stats were very high. I thought this was going to save me a lot of time. I thought this was going to be easier, right? So that was, and these are sophomores, right? So once again, they don't have a lot of the ability to make that decision on their own. So what we did as a department then is we started talking more about that, and it really became an advising type issue. So all of us who are advising the students, when they're talking about, all right, I need to register for Principles of Management, I'm going to take that online because I know that's going to be easier. Whoa, wait a minute, we need to talk about this. We actually sent out information to students before they would register to say, here's what an online class is, here's the myths, here's the truth. Now, we've done that for so many years, we haven't really need to do that anymore, and it's pretty rare that we find somebody in the class now that hasn't at least had some kind of understanding of what it's going to mean, because now word starts getting out, and then people pass down a little bit about, wait a minute, it's not easier, but hey, if you want flexibility, this is a great part of it, that type of thing. So I think that as a department, if you're offering the classes, that's a great thing to do, is to sit down as a department and talk about that so that students can get some information. In regards to your second question, I would say it depends. As we get the notices from the Ask office, for instance, about how students are doing, it's not always the students that are doing poorly in the online class. Sometimes I'm like, wow, everything's turned in, they're doing great. What I have found it seems to come down to is their ability to do time management, not necessarily if they're a student who is an A student or not an A student. Time management seems to be the biggest issue, and the issue that I spend most of my time talking with students about if they're not doing well in the online environment.
One thing I'll throw in real quick too, there's a number of different kind of profiles of what type of students are successful in an online environment, and Matt's put one together. We use one in the program, and I think it's worthwhile to have students self-reflect and share their thoughts with another person. Do I fit this part? Do I fit this part? This part? This part? And just have them talk about it and really think about each of those aspects. Like it's labor intensive, but if somebody's coming into the whole program, it's really, I think, time well spent too.
But I think as we're increasingly seeing, in the department, I think that makes a lot of sense. As we're increasingly seeing Gen Ed courses go there, that slips outside of any nets of the department. And I just think that's something that I'm concerned about, just because I know we had folks that I was pretty concerned about, and some of them did okay. Now, I mean, another question that, and I don't need a long answer or even how you do this, but what is your level of academic integrity concerns in distance? I mean, in teaching distance, because that's another big thing that I worried about and continue to worry about. Just looking at the course we taught.
You mean worrying about students coming to class, coming to the online class, not doing their own work, kind of?
Yeah, that the work I see, I have no concept that that's these students work. And I'll say, I teach courses where predominantly the graded work they do is very often happening so like I know when you took this test, you took this test.
How do you know?
Because I watched them take it.
Do you know it's them?
Yes.
Who showed you? I'm being.
No, we do.
You check their IDs when they come in the first time?
I do, we're in the classroom looking for our students.
That's
Yes. And we have done that before. So I mean, that's a concern that we've had. We have done that before. We also know who our students are. We put a lot of time into it.
There is actually a generic concern about that colleges have been addressing, and some colleges are beginning to address it. And there are various ways to deal with it. Some institutions will simply just have students just vouch for this is who I am, and that's all that's needed, all the way to having a remote proctoring service that basically checks their ID and their face and watches them while they take tests. So it's kind of a continuum between all those things, and it really depends on what the program is.
Well, my question was, what are your concerns? I mean, I realize there's lots of ways to do it. So I mean, and I could come up with ways to do it too. But like, what are your concerns? Or do you just not have those concerns?
I can say that I really just designed so that somebody's going to spend a lot of time working to do the assignments if they're going to do it. And obviously, if somebody does it, well, somebody's learning and somebody's paying. Do I really care?
I certainly care.
Yeah, obviously I do, but you get the feel that you can watch kind of. I know the students there physically in the face-to-face class. I can watch that work and the consistency at work and get a pretty good feel for I know that student. The way they write, the way they work, the consistency of timing.
Class, right?
Yeah, and online. Either at the at least junior level that I usually get, or at the graduate level as well. I guess I've never had the concern, but then I've never given a test either.
Yeah, it seems to pop up more in environments where there's more standardized testing, or there's more there are assessments that are a bit more cut and dried. Whereas if you have, no one ever, when I wrote my dissertation, there was no one that was very concerned about checking whether or not I wrote that dissertation. I mean, obviously they were checking by their interactions with me, but there would have been, I don't really think I could have paid anyone enough money to write this.
Sorry, after I rebuttal, my brother works for Capella. He does doctoral advising. And this is his single biggest issue. Maybe you were.
People are turning in other dissertations.
Others can, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Plagiarizing, paying other people to do it. I mean, he's for a lot of reasons, ready to quit this environment. But that's his single biggest concern. He's got a lack of academic integrity.
But I
think we have
still had
to
to do the interview when it was all done. So I don't know. How would you catch? I'm just wondering how that'd be different than face-to-face.
Well, I was going to say with the face-to-face, except for the exam face-to-face, everything else is the same. Somebody could be having them do their homework outside. If whatever's happening outside of the classroom would be the exact same issue. So I don't think that they're necessarily separate. It's an issue in education, not necessarily just with online education.
So then what do you do with tests and quizzes? Do you have them? Do you not have them? You said you just don't have them.
I usually let my students, so I give a test in the online environment, I actually let them take it twice, if they want, because they learn.
I mean, but my response to that is assessment's not education for me. I know that they're in the classroom when I'm teaching. Like, so I know that they're there for that part of it. I realize, I have no interest in making my job about policing, whether it's face-to-face or online, but I know if that student's there in class or not. So I know that they're part of, to me, the more important part of the educational process that I can see. Now, I can't see if they've read, but they take their, if they take their test or their quiz in class, I know that they did it. If someone else did their homework outside of class, okay, I don't know that, but I do know that they're there for what to me is more important, which is the actual educational experience. But online, I didn't know.
So is what they're doing outside of class not the educational experience?
I didn't say that, but there is part of the educational experience that I'm there for, which is the in-class.
And how do you verify that the students that are in your classroom?
All I'm saying is I know they're there.
Right.
Right? Where with online, I don't even have that. I can know someone. I mean, and I don't think. I'm not saying I'm super concerned about this, but to say that, well, in face-to-face, you don't know anybody. I sure know that they're in class, right? And then it's my job as a teacher, the kind of teacher that I am. It's my job to make that a powerful educational experience when I know they're physically in the room. I mean, I think conversion is a word that I think about a lot. I mean, we're in a field where, maybe we did when we did our welcome to new majors, we had 2 people come. But we have, 25 people graduate with our degree. We're a conversion major, right? And so part of that is what happens in that classroom, and that's on us, right? And that's the thing that I think we're good at. And so I know that they're there for that because I'm looking them in the eye when we're talking about that. So that part of the educational experience, I know they're there.
I think I'm going to jump in, but it's 5, a little bit after 5 at this point. And again, I'd like to thank our panelists and audience. We got involved here. That was really good. I'd really encourage you to carry on conversations with the folks that are here and keep asking questions. And I think we're all about the same thing, which is really trying to provide the best educational experience we can. And we get there by asking hard questions and digging in and sharing experiences and trying things and failing at times and just continuing to really, really press in on it. So I want to thank everybody for being here and panelists especially too.